I advise to many clients. They are average clients. They're not wealthy people. But in total, it's several $100 million. So I'm their financial advisor, and I invest for them in the stock market. A good Christian businessman is a man of integrity. Now, every business has to make a profit. A profit's not a bad word, but your profit needs to be reasonable to the expenses involved in delivering the goods and services. So if you're manufacturing and your quality's not good, but you still try and sell it to somebody, I don't think that's a Christian businessman. The number one rule on my team is when we catch a problem, fix it. Number one thing, fix it, then call the client and let them know we caught the problem, because it's much better to tell them before they figure it out. Because if I tell them, then they remember that honesty. So if somewhere down the road I make a mistake that I don't catch, they're going to be more gracious to me, because we cannot be perfect. It's not about power. It's about service. Now, in the process of trying to be better and better, I've also made a lot of money. But that wasn't the goal.
My story begins when I was 3 years old.
Meine Geschichte beginnt, als ich 3 Jahre alt war.
My father put a gun to his head and blew out his brains.
Mein Vater setzte sich eine Pistole an den Kopf und hat einen Teil seines Gehirns rausgeschossen.
3 months later, my mother abandoned me at an American orphanage.
3 Monate später hat meine Mutter mich verlassen, abgeschoben in ein Waisenhaus in Amerika.
I lived in that orphanage for 14 years.
14 Jahre lebte ich in diesem Waisenhaus.
Growing up in an orphanage, I didn't know what it meant to be family. I didn't know what it meant to be a husband or a father. And I made mistakes, as everybody does. People often wonder, well, was it harder for you to be married because you didn't grow up with a family? You grew up in an orphanage. And my answer is, I don't know, but I was passionate about being a husband and father. People often say, what's the hardest thing for you about being married with your childhood? And my honest answer is, the hardest thing is my wife's a woman and I'm a man.
But kids like us,
Aber Kinder wie wir,
abandoned children,
die verlassen worden sind,
abused children,
die Missbrauch erlitten haben,
we think it is our fault.
wir denken, das ist unsere Schuld.
I think God is always calling adults to help the children, especially the defenseless children. But many adults are not listening. But God keeps calling, and He starts calling somebody new.
Und ich sagte, Moment mal, tritt mal auf die Bremse.
I'm getting off.
Hier steige ich aus.
Why should I
Warum soll ich
apologize to a God
Gott gegenüber mich entschuldigen,
who would leave me in an orphanage for 14 years?
der es zugelassen hat, dass ich 14 Jahre meines Lebens in einem Waisenhaus verbringe?
God owes me an apology.
Gott muss sich eigentlich bei mir entschuldigen.
I became a Christian after much fighting in my own self when I was 17, and it began a radical transformation of my life. About 4 years later, I forgave the people who wounded me the most. And forgiving is a process. Forgiving is not denying, it's not excusing, it is not justifying. Forgiving is releasing. It's releasing the anger, even if that person doesn't know they're forgiven, or if that person doesn't accept it. As a Christian, that's not our call. Our call is not somebody else's response. It's our response. My father committed suicide. I had to forgive him for abandonment, because I think suicide is abandonment. My mother wounded me the most. She wounded me over and over and over again. She was the hardest to forgive, the most painful, so I kept her for last. My mother was psychologically and mentally ill. She was in and out of lockdown psychiatric hospitals against her will, and she died what we call a bag lady on the streets of Chicago. I could say that justifies it. I don't let her off that easy. She still had choices. She knew she was a sick woman, but she still chose to drink, and she still chose drugs. She chose not to work with counselors. She made choices. And some people will say, well, a child grows up to be successful because they grew up in a good family. I did not grow up in a good family. I grew up in an orphanage. So I do not accept that my success is because of how I was born. It certainly was not my environment. I made choices, and I kept making choices. And lots of them are not easy. One of the great struggles for most men is to be sexually faithful to their wife. It just is. But I have been. But I would lie if I said it was always easy, because I'm very much a man, and it's easy to be tempted. So not everything is easy, but everything is a choice. Now, some things we can't choose, and here's the one thing that no one has ever been able to choose in the history of humanity, and they never will. We can never choose our parents. What I recommend to anybody who's lonely, children and adults, the number one thing, go serve somebody who can never pay you back. When you're really lonely, you want someone to do things for you. You want someone to fill your emptiness. The young woman, the mature woman, who maybe isn't married and wonders, why isn't there a good man for me, has a deep sense of loneliness. But my recommendation is always go serve somebody who cannot pay you back. So let me give you some examples. Perhaps go to the school and help a child who can't read well, and just help them read a book. In every country, and certainly in Germany, are retirement homes, pensions, is that right? And there's so many lonely, especially widows there, who would love someone to talk to, and they feel invisible, and often their family ignores them. Maybe once a week or once a month, go visit the pension. The world is full of broken, wounded people. And as I came to understand in telling my story, almost nobody can relate to growing up in an orphanage. But growing up in an orphanage is a detail. What they relate to are the issues of being abandoned, of being betrayed, of feeling unloved, unwanted, of being desperately lonely, of being angry at one or both of their biological parents, and being angry with God. Those were my issues. They're the issues of the human condition. Robbing the orphanage is just a detail. And when I started seeing that, even though at times it's uncomfortable, then I felt free to keep telling my story. And people keep asking to hear it, because they want authentic hope in the broken woundedness of their own life.